Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this truth bomb riff. It is, I guess, Tuesday? Yes, Tuesday,
It's
April
April
Fool's Day, 2025.
Fool's Day.
And
April Fool's Day, Patrick.
yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day to you, my friend.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And hopefully, I'll be taking some of that good fortune into this dialogue because there's probably few people on this in this country that I respect more than this gentleman that's right above me on my screen. Gentleman by the name of Marc Dann, former Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. He's in private practice. I'll go into a little bit more detail in this dialogue about his background, but this conversation is in service to providing the audience out there and all of those that are watching this that I can get this to understand that there are people in our system and our network that know how to fight back, that have a career of being able to do the good work. And Marc Dann is probably one of the premier examples of this that I've come across in my experience. And Marc, we live in some pretty turbulent times. And I think I want to just start the conversation just to kind of get to know you a little bit about a little bit in terms of, what created who you are and how you have arrived at the sort of capacity, the perspective, the ability to do what you do, because nobody just comes out of nowhere. Everybody always has a journey. And you're from the great state of Ohio. Don't know if you were born there.
Yes.
I do know that you
Yeah.
went to the University of Michigan, but if you could just kind of, from the outset, just give me a little bit of perspective of your upbringing and what the state of Ohio is in the Cleveland area. Give us some sort of insight from your experience.
Well, first of all, Patrick, I don't tell you this enough, but I appreciate and respect your dogged determination to tell the story of how corruption has really rotted the American economic and political system. And you're just amazing in your unbelievable persistence through years and years of many people would have given up long before you have, and I don't know that you ever will, and I hope you don't, because what you do is of great value, and the broader the audience, I think the better that will be for the country and for everybody else, so thank you, first of all, for continuing to believe in me, and in believing in what's, in that at the end of the day, that if you do what's right, that we can win. And I do believe that. And it does seem like hopeless, difficult times. When Trump was elected the first time, I was able to have the Reagan talk with my kids and my family. That we got through 4 years of Reagan. We thought it was the end of the world, and we got through to the other end, and it wasn't. In retrospect, it wasn't so bad. Certainly, looking at it from today's perspective, I wasn't able to have that same talk with my family this time. And so it's very troubling and very concerning, and we we all should be in a state of heightened concern and panic and focus. Those of us that are fortunate enough to have the skills and the experience and the resources to be able to fight, and to raise concerns and to articulate those concerns. I think it's incumbent on every single American patriot to rise up at this time in history to do that. And I continue to be not necessarily surprised, but disappointed in the number of institutions and individuals who I've respected over the years that have decided not to do that in this circumstance, including many in the leadership of the Democratic Party. Um, Patrick, it's a long story that got me here. I have a lot of gray hair, as you can
Can I
see.
insert
But
something real
yeah,
quick
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
okay? Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, and it means the world to me. I've been the most fortunate guy ever because I've been able to pairing my interests, from what I've studied and everything else, but into a career as a producer that led me on this journey that led to Marc Dann's revelations, which the audience you have to be able to wrap your head around this information. You can find it at thecon.tv. It's free. but it reveals the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that never ended. That Marc Dann played a critical role at proving to the world of what should have happened and what he actually executed in the state of Ohio, but that didn't. That's led us to this monumental train wreck. But I want to reset this before you go into the Democratic Party, because look, I know this history somewhat as an outsider of the great state of Ohio. I mean, Cleveland itself was the centerpiece of the American exceptionalism by way of the unbelievable innovation that came from the Industrial Revolution that took place. That was probably the centerpiece of our power, and you had all of the most powerful, let's just call them oligarchs of their time, but that emanated out of Cleveland. Obviously, in its first generation, when you think about Rockefeller, you think about Carnegie, you think about the industrialization and all of those incredible innovations that came out of the Midwest that would ultimately become the Rust Belt. And one of the undercurrents that I recall having a great degree of fascination with was, quite frankly, organized crime, which played a large role in this arena as well. So you were born in this DNA, and I believe you come from Youngstown. Is that correct originally?
No, but I lived in Youngstown for about 21 years. So I grew
Okay,
up in I grew up in well a couple of places, but primarily grew up in Cleveland, and still now I still live in Cleveland. But raised we raised our family, my ex-wife and I, in Youngstown. That was her hometown, and I represented the Youngstown area in the Ohio Senate, and that's where I was when I was elected Attorney General in Ohio. So I
there,
have a
there,
strong
there,
connection to the Mahoney Valley and to its history and to its and I think to its unique strengths. And which helps me, and it's, by the way, an area. My Senate district was one of the most Democratic Senate districts in the country, particularly for a person who wasn't of color. And it is now a 20% Trump index district.
interesting.
Just less than 20 years later.
Yeah,
Um, uh,
because of what? Because of the
because of
specific.
exactly what we've witnessed. So
Right. So you have
I got to see that up close.
right. So I
Yeah,
just want to plant
yeah.
these three seeds, and I'm gonna let you riff on this because
Okay.
I remember in Youngstown the story of Traficant, and look again, organized crime has always been there in the midst of Ohio, and I'm very familiar with former Congressman Kucinich and Senator and presidential candidate and some of his stories from early on, particularly in the 70s, it relates to corporations acting similarly, quite frankly. But you have all of these sort of mechanisms. Can you tie that together based on
Yeah.
how you grew up within this and how that forged your career?
Yeah, well, I've had some great role models and mentors over the years, and I've also, grown up in what's the proverb? May you live in interesting times, and I believe I've been fortunate to do that. So growing up in Cleveland, Dennis Kucinich, when I was in high school, was mayor, and so I got to watch that up close, both his rise to power in taking on the corporate elite of this community, which had dominated Cleveland government, politics, culture, and civics for 150 years, since, as you mentioned, John D. Rockefeller started his career here in Cleveland. We had great industrial oligarchs of the 19th century, here in Cleveland in the early 20th century, who were also, unlike the current set of oligarchs, also incredible philanthropists who built a foundation. And in the city of Youngstown, very similarly, was a industrial center, very wealthy community. We used to talk about it as the Silicon Valley of the early 1900s. I mean, we were where everybody wanted to live and who everybody wanted to be, because we were at a natural geographic location, both for distribution of products and for access to natural resources, from iron ore to oil and gas to all the and labor. Um, and amazingly, Ohio was a great destination for immigrants from all over the world who built that industry. on behalf of those oligarchs, and who still maintain very strong, ethnic communities throughout northeast and northern Ohio. And so I was fortunate there. So yeah, so I got to watch Kucinich from a bit of a distance. I got very involved in politics very early in my life. I was a delegate to the 1980 Democratic Convention for Jimmy Carter. My best friend ran for delegate for Kennedy. So I started probably on the conservative end of the Democratic Party, or what was then the conservative end of the Democratic Party. And he and I both went on at University of Michigan and got involved in additional government and politics there. We both were early supporters of a guy named Gary Hart, who ran for president. And we went to Iowa when he won the New Hampshire primary. My friend Mark Blumenthal and I were driving back through Chicago used a payphone. For those of you that don't know what that is, that's something you would put money into to make phone calls. To call the DC headquarters of the Hart campaign, and he asked where we were, and they said I'm in Chicago. They said, well, congratulations, you're the field director for the Hart campaign in Illinois. Now, the bad news was I was a senior at University of Michigan at the time. Mark was at least fortunate enough. They told Mark to go on home to Ann Arbor so that he could run the Michigan campaign. But I built a campaign committee very, very quickly with not all the delegates that we needed, in against a big labor and the old Chicago machine, who was all in support of Walter Mondale. So I've always kind of been part of the insurgent since that first Carter experience. I've always been part of the insurgent part of the Democratic Party, and there's always been one in the 40 years that I've been around this stuff. So I was very fortunate to have some great experiences early on. I went on to Missouri. I actually won the Indiana primary as Hart's campaign director in Indiana, and on to New Jersey, and on to the convention, where people may not remember, but in '84, there was still a potential floor fight over the nomination. And so but there was a great, as there is now, there was a great fight over the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, the institutionalists versus those of us that thought we ought to modernize and change the way that we were talking and thinking about issues, from everything from national defense to, to delivery of social services. Even before the whole Clinton era and all the changes that were incumbent based on that. So I've been very lucky. I also had some other great mentors. One summer during college, I was Jerry Springer's driver when he ran for governor of Ohio. By the way, those of you that didn't live here in 1982. Jerry was actually a fairly serious candidate for governor of Ohio. In fact, a very serious candidate. He was a boring news anchor. Actually, at the time, he was mayor of Cincinnati, and ran. He then became a boring news anchor after that. But in terms of communication, in terms of ways to think and talk about government and politics, spending a summer in the car with him was an incredible learning experience. I then became the next summer of college, I became Sherrod Brown's worst driver ever. I was the first day on the job. We went to a meeting in downtown Cleveland, and I was a little bit naive about the parking rules. And we came down after, literally on my first day, the car was towed. Um, uh, uh, but but spending time with Sherrod, and again, I mean, Jerry Springer was a great political mind. Say what you want about how he spent his life and career. He understood government politics, had a great passion for justice and for economic justice, and for using government as a tool to help people that need help in times of their life when they need it, which was not a concept that was in great favor in 1982. But was Sherrod was running third for Secretary of State in that race of Ohio, a month and a half before the primary when I started, and he was able to win the primary, Democratic primary, with a little bit of a late infusion of I think it was about $120,000 that we worked very, very hard to raise. And then Sherrod went on to become, of course, Secretary of State. And after being briefly swept out in the Newt Gingrich election, onto Congress and to the U.S. Senate. So again, another great political mind.
And chairman of the Senate Banking Committee for how long?
Yeah, yeah, but not long enough,
Well,
Patrick. I mean,
apparently, yeah.
there was a guy that understood that what they were there for was to represent the people that elected them, not the people that put money in their campaign committee. And I've been amazed, because I was fortunate. Jerry was not a traditional politician. Sherrod was not a traditional politician in the sense that he never prioritized, or very rarely prioritized, the interests of the donor class over the working class. Even back when that was not fashionable at all, and when all the stakes were much lower and much less harmful. During Sherrod's campaign, I met a guy named Charlie Brown, who was Sherrod's brother. Charlie went on to be elected Attorney General of West Virginia. When I was graduated law school, I went to work for a tall building law firm in downtown Cleveland. And I remember this distinctly on the day that I got and that was the only job, by the way, that I've ever had. Job, job. Yeah, I got my business cards, and looked at them and called my wife at the time and said, "I don't think this is me." And she said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I just got a call from the Charleston Gazette." She was a journalist. Charleston Gazette was an incredible, crusading, populist newspaper,
Wow.
one of the best locally owned newspapers in the world, actually, in the country for sure. Owned by a guy named Ned Chilton, who was just a patriot who loved West Virginia, who spoke truth to power, and empowered his reporters to do that. And she goes, "This is a great opportunity for me, but I know you just graduated law school, and you were hoping to make some money." So well, I said, "Well, call him up." Actually, Charlie called me first, said, "Would you come down and run my campaign for AG?" And so then Alyssa called the Gazette, and I said, "Well, Charlie, if the Gazette hires Alyssa, and I don't know if he had anything to do with it. I don't think he did, but that we'll come down there." So we moved to West Virginia for a couple of years, after running Charlie's reelection campaign. So there was a time when Charlie was the Charlie was the Attorney General of West Virginia, which is just across the Ohio River, of course, from Ohio, and his brother Sherrod was the Secretary of State of Ohio. Charlie was a populist, crusading attorney general, my role model for what I wanted to do when I was AG. Unfortunately, I followed his path in too many ways, but he was an incredible populist that could only exist in a state like West Virginia at the time. And when the campaign was over, he made me the antitrust director for the state of West Virginia. And so, and in that capacity, we took on a merger. We took on the insurance industry over commercial general liability insurance, where they were fixing the prices for that, that harmed West Virginia businesses. And one of the very first multi-state AG investigations that we became a leader in that process, and I got to know AG, again, crusading AG staff members from all over the country, working on that case. We brought our own case against both the ice industry in West Virginia, where they were fixing prices and driving competition out. Mainly, getting back to your point, by use of force through some of the organized crime elements in West Virginia, and took on a merger of a Pittsburgh company called Koppers, that was the largest manufacturer of wood additive. And wood additive, West Virginia wood is of generally lower quality than other woods around the country, and so the logging industry in West Virginia would be disproportionately affected if the price of the treatment chemicals for wood treatment went up, and so we had a good basis and challenged the merger. I'm actually working on a case now with the other one of the other young lawyers that was in that office with me, and this was before computers really and electronic discovery. We came down one Saturday, and there was a semi truck full of documents parked outside of our office. And we went in and got a hand truck and unloaded literally a semi truck full of documents that we then made our best efforts to review. Uh, uh, and we didn't have a lot of other help, but I learned, yeah,
Can I
yeah,
insert something just real quick to
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Okay, so that reminds me of one of the most compositely profound experiences I've had on this journey so far in making the con is in investigating and researching Ferdinand Pecora, because at that time period, as you well know, but the audience writ large might not know, Ferdinand Pecora was put in a position following the Great Depression to do the investigation to find out what caused the Great Depression. And what he and a relatively understaffed group of assistants were able to get inside the vaults of some of the main players on Wall Street, like Citibank at that time and some others. And they did what you just did. That's remarkable, because I think of that I mean, what we have is so easy in comparison to something like that. And just he recalibrated the entirety of the United States for the next 70 years as a result of being able to dig into the evidence. But here you are
Yeah.
doing it. Wow, what an amazing experience, Mark.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I wanted to raise the stakes, so I actually was recruited to California to run the Attorney General's race out there. So it was and of course, living in Ohio and West Virginia, I thought, well, it was the District Attorney of San Francisco versus the District Attorney of Los Angeles. What I didn't understand at the time that was that San Francisco was about 1/10 the size of Los Angeles. I learned that very quickly when I went out there. My candidate Arlo Smith was up against Ira Reiner, who was a very well-known prosecutor in Los Angeles, who actually and this was ended up being his downfall at the end of the campaign, prosecuted the McMartin preschool case, and we were able to beat him as an underdog in the primary. And unfortunately, in a bit of a wave election in 1990 for the Republicans, we lost. Actually, I was the original election denier, because I then waved into the California bar and spent the next 2 months litigating. That's how close it was. We won on election night, and lost on the absentee ballots, which was truly, the Trump folks act like that was just new, that those kind of things, but that was new then. Mail-in voting in California was literally just started, and the Republicans figured it out a lot faster than we did. But I was challenging ballots in California courts for the first half of 1990. And so again, Arlo was a straight as an arrow guy. We were always underfunded. We were not fortunate to have um, uh, the the backing of the large corporate community of the state, which was based in Southern California primarily. But he was determined, and he was a great, really truly great candidate and human being. And I was fortunate to have the chance to work with him. On that ticket with us was Dianne Feinstein, running for governor at the time. We all lost. Well, she lost anyway, to Pete Wilson, at the time. And so we met, I met some just incredible, again, another person I got to spend that kind of time with. Jerry Brown was the state party chairman at the time. So I got to know him a little bit in that capacity, and learned that you can be weird and crazy and still persist in politics for years and years and years, and he did. I reminded him of that when we were both attorneys general at the same time, years later. So again, I just good luck in being in the right place at the right time. I got to, people that were willing to challenge norms, and to challenge and to work outside of the usual party discipline and structure, and so forth. Um, my ex-wife, who was still one of my if not my dearest friend, which I'm very fortunate about. But she wanted to go back to Youngstown, where San Francisco. In fact, we saw the movie Roger and Me. I don't know if you remember that.
It
You're a
was a
filmmaker,
huge
so who
influence
does
in what I
you
do.
must remember, right? Michael Moore's first movie, or one of his first movies anyway. We went to a theater in San Francisco after a fancy dinner and saw Roger and Me, and she looked at me and I looked at her and said, "We don't belong here. We belong in Youngstown," which is where her family was from. So we moved back to Youngstown. I went into law practice with her ex-boyfriend, a guy named David Beatrice. David just recently left. He was the Mahoney County Democratic chairman for many years. Wrote memo after memo after memo to the state and national Democratic Party, explaining how they were screwing themselves, and in their tactics and their strategies, and how they were, and the emphasis that they had in their, all the things that we're going to have to do to rebuild the party. Dave Beatrice was telling the state and national Democratic Party for years before, and I have the memos. I mean, actually, they were, they were,
Wow.
we were part of the reform group of the Democratic Party in Youngstown.
Can I
I
ask
was,
you a quick question?
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
so sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, yeah,
I'd be remiss not to ask this question, considering
yeah,
that I also know you're a football fan, and a
yeah,
season ticker of the incoming number two pick Cleveland Browns, of course.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, the DeBartolos in Youngstown in San
yeah, yeah,
Francisco. Did you swim
yeah.
in those circles at all?
Yeah, well, I knew him. In fact, I knew him well enough that when we were in San Francisco, and I arranged for my candidate to meet them at a 49ers game. I knew that you should wear a suit and tie to the game, to meet them. He thought I was insane, but everybody in their box was in a suit and tie, at the game. So Youngstown is a very, old school kind of a place. So I got to know them. There were actually two kind of oligarchs of the Mahoney Valley. One was DeBartolo, and they were both shopping mall magnates. The other was a guy named Cafaro, and they both had family businesses, all self-financed, by the way. No Wall Street money in this at
Interesting.
all.
Interesting.
And they refused to, for a long time, until the younger generation took over in the DeBartolo, and I think still in with the Cafaros. They refused to ever borrow money ever, from anybody. They self-financed, and they owned hundreds of shopping malls, both families around the country. So it was a unique place in that way. And they both had, they both played an outsized role in local politics, as well. Again, in a much more like our current times, where the corruption was a little bit more transparent, than under the table. But politicians often did the bidding of those folks, and it was what it was. And I did my best to navigate those things. Look, when Hale Boggs was the minority leader of the U.S. House, and he said, if you can't eat their food, drink their booze, and spend time with their women, and not vote against them in the morning, you don't belong in the U.S. Congress. And so, that's kind of was my guiding light in how, I approached politics. I didn't want to. I wanted to win. I wanted to be a winner, and I ultimately was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And but to win, you need money. You need to play the game, but you also need to remember who the hell you are, and what brought you there, and who you're there for, at the end of the day. And obviously that led to disappointments from time to time from some of the people that contributed money. But I was willing to sustain that if I needed to. And at some point when I was Attorney General and I needed some friends, I didn't have any friends left, because of that. But again, things happen for a reason, and there we were. So eventually, I got the bug. I ran for I ran for state senate in 2000, and I lost to a 25-year-old kid who never had a job. His name was Tim Ryan. Tim then became a congressman, and then was our most recent, or prior to he was our 2022 candidate for U.S. Senate. And frankly, he run a better campaign. I think he might have won, but he came very close actually to prevailing in that race. Um, and so creating JD Vance for us, who was his opponent during that campaign.
Wait,
Um,
I didn't catch
and
the, I didn't catch the correlation to where he created JD Vance.
that was his opponent.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So Vance was the Republican nominee in that race, and we didn't quite know how odious he was at the time, but we had a pretty good idea. Um,
Did you know he
and
was connected to Peter Thiel at the time?
We did.
Okay.
A lot of the money for that, and his Trump endorsement in that race was the result of that relationship. Um, anyway, so we learned a little bit there. Actually, one of the largest fundraisers in the state, my ex-wife and I had for Tim right before that election. So I was proud to support him. He would have been a great senator. He may still be a great senator or governor someday. I hope he is. His mentor was a guy named Jim Traficant, who you referenced a little bit earlier. So, and one of the reasons I was not surprised at Trump and the success that he had is because I watched Jim Traficant both as a citizen and a constituent, and as a lawyer in a community, and as a candidate running side by side with Jim Traficant. One of the most important lessons in politics he taught me was that there was no reason at a political event that was long and boring that you couldn't substitute a little bit of alcohol in your coffee cup for coffee to be able to sustain those things. Uh, but watching him operate very, by the way, transparently corruptly during his time. And he was part of a culture of corruption that existed in the Youngstown area that my former law partner and I were part of helping to clean up to a certain extent. Certainly watched 120 lawyers and judges go to jail over the time that I was there. Saw the devastating effect of a community where the leadership was focused on their own enrichment at the expense of their constituents. And Traficant was as talented a communicator as he was. And if you look at old video of Jim Traficant and new video of Donald Trump, you will see huge parallels between the two in their rhetoric and their style and their professions of victimhood on behalf of those folks that were victims, because at the time that was going on, and it continued, of course, that the globalization of trade in the way that it was conducted from Clinton on, from the all started created an environment where the people who were proud, hardworking Americans lost the expectation that their children would have a better life than they did, and that literally watched the American dream crushed in front of my eyes. So the failure of the political leadership to modernize the industry and diversify the industry was kind of one aspect. I spent years watching politicians waiting for the steel industry to come back, and then watching the national the payoff to at that time corporate America that was part of the outsourcing of jobs all over the world from very, very hardworking, proud people who were able to make a good living, take care of their families, always paid their taxes, paid their parking tickets. I mean, those are the people that I live with. My kids were fortunate enough to grow up with in the Youngstown area, but they really and Traficant's ability and Donald Trump's ability to identify with those families and those disappointments was central to his election, to Trump's election in 2016 and in 2024. And now the solution that both of them offered were wrong. I mean, Traficant was just raping his congressional office. He was involved in he was, yeah.
Can I just
Yes.
insert this for
Yeah. Yeah.
perspective? Because,
Yeah.
okay, well, this is really interesting because I started off the dialogue just talking about the DNA, right? We're all a confluence of our experience, our life experience, our direction. And as we're going through this river of your existence, which really touchstones on some very powerful people, which I didn't really understand before, which is really interesting in the dynamics of this. First of all, this is a sidebar. I'd like to say that, boy, would I like to see Marc Dann run for Senate against the ultimate fool, Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and all of his fraud. Just as a,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, but what we're going to get to, and I can obviously see why we're going this way and what's in your heart and your mind, because
Yeah.
yes, the Democratic Party has to be reformed. It has to be revolutionized, and based on ultimately what we're going to get to, which is, I believe, your expertise that it stands so high above, and now I understand even more so why you were able to, you know, navigate this confluence of all these difficult situations, but maintain your identity, especially in what you were able to accomplish as AG. And I'll circle back to that in a minute. But just to remind people where we are in this conversation, which I find extremely fascinating. First of all, Ohio was the nexus of innovation and the industrial powerhouse at the turn of the century. Mark had suggested that, it was well known that, like, let's say Youngstown was like the Silicon Valley of that era. It was remarkably huge. And of course, those oligarchs were very involved with, the arts and the foundational thing that turned, Ohio into a world-class place, particularly Cleveland, right? Especially with the arts and everything that just further develops, everything that constitutes this community. But at the same time, you have never been naive to the undercurrents of power and the undercurrents of, how things get done. There's cooperation. Sometimes things can maybe go the wrong direction, especially because there's that undercurrent of organized crime the whole time period. But within the confluence of what we're talking about, neoliberalism at the turn of the Clinton time period, where this industrial powerhouse of Ohio during your formative years turns into the Rust Belt because of globalization. And then what happens in the aftermath? What we're hearing is, suddenly when the jobs go and the balance and the dynamism of innovation and the middle class that is able to contribute its tax flow and the revenue to all of these types of things that create a better community, what you have literally in the definition of rust is you have the situation where only then can the sort of structures of unorganized crime really start to develop. And so you're making this connection between what you observe firsthand with Traficant's career and what he did, and now Donald Trump. And those of you who have followed this podcast and many others, you know that Donald Trump's main go-to, and there was a movie that got quashed right before the election called The Apprentice. It wasn't based on The Apprentice, the television show. He was the apprentice to Cohn,
Roy Cohn, right?
Give me my Roy Cohn, which is an absolute expression of everything that I'm kind of in a pinpoint, right? So moving into the next part of the conversation, the nature of all of these forces, right? In terms of how do you maintain first your North Star, and then ultimately, how do you configure that into, okay, this is reality, this is causality, this is where we want to create the balance, and this is what I do as a politician. Can you bring all of that together as we move forward in the next 20 minutes of this dialogue to how you personally would take your experience, potentially reform the Democratic Party based on the realities of what we're facing?
Well, yeah. I mean, the answer is you got to stop being afraid. My early exposure to all these kind of outsized political personalities and people and challenges, I learned not to. I'm not afraid of. I'm not afraid. Except of anything except ghosts, maybe. So I mean, I learned that these people, put on their clothes one leg at a time. I learned that people that have intestinal fortitude, Traficant used to call it as a metaphor for balls, are the ones that can persist and overcome many of the things, many of the challenges. So ironically, I think part of the solution is embracing a little of the courage that Donald Trump has shown. I know there's nobody tuned in expecting me to put that sentence together. To challenge the orthodoxies, first within his party and now within government, um, to better advocate for the people that put him there. Um, and now, hopefully, the people that will put the Democrats or whoever the next party is that takes this on, because I'm not 100% sure it's going to be the Democratic Party, but whatever the loyal opposition is, whatever form it takes in the future, they need to be prepared to do that, to rethink those models and those structures. I mean, uh, I've been struggling with an op-ed about the lawyer situation. And
We're talking about that. We're
while I
talking
have
about the tall building law firms that are under attack currently because
right, the ones that are being yeah,
they've been playing ball the whole time, and it's just kind of like
right. So as and while I support those that are fighting the Trump executive orders, which are clearly unconstitutional and clearly unlawful, 100%. I don't think we don't want to lose the context that these were the folks both under Democratic and Republican administrations that created the environment that allowed Trump to emerge to begin with, and created that orthodoxy and the uh, co uh, uh, co-option of government for the benefit of their corporate and oligarch clients. Whether it came to whether as you and I have lamented over and over again in the last few years, the fact that nobody from the financial crisis was prosecuted. Nobody in corporate America gets prosecuted very often at all. I mean, I spent years here trying to. And we were fortunate that the current attorney general finally pulled the trigger and went after the first energy executives who engaged in the largest corruption scandal in Ohio history, and that's really saying something because we've had a very corrupt history in state government in Ohio. Continues to be very corrupt, but that was really an unbelievable at $90 million in exchange for billions of dollars in benefit to the largest public utility in the state.
yeah.
Those
And
executives
to
are
my and to
finally
my
being prosecuted.
to
Yeah,
my to my understanding, their directive, a lot of it was built upon kind of the predicate of your investigations and what you revealed that we found. I mean, look, the corollary that
yeah,
people need to understand is that government, particularly the attorney general, has a position to protect, obviously, in the consumer side, but also in the criminal side in a couple of states, and there's some
mm,
crossover there in Ohio. But government to serve of, by, and for the people, as opposed to of, by, and for the corrupt corporations, for example,
right.
you have
Mm,
to have people with dignity, integrity, and character to uphold the law on behalf of the citizenry, of which you addressed earlier, and you
right.
actually accomplished. Can you bridge what you
Yeah.
did without all the details? Because I want to come back to that in the
Yeah. Yeah.
conclusion,
Yeah.
but to what you just referenced in terms of what the
Yeah.
current AG did.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, the AG is an independently elected office holder. You're a constitutional office holder. And while I think you could argue the governor outranks the AG has independent powers. The attorney general represents the state of Ohio. Very few attorneys general in the history of the state, and frankly, most often not the current attorney general, except in this one instance, exercise that independence and discretion on behalf of the state. You also have a duty to represent state agencies, and so sometimes that will create a conflict for a lawyer that is solvable by allowing those state entities to hire outside counsel when you have a different view of what the legal outcome ought to be of various situations. But understanding that and not being and look, and here's the problem, and this is the problem with frankly more the Republicans at this point in the Senate and the House than the Democrats. But the Democrats have this problem too, is not being afraid to lose. You know what? Life out of politics is you can still have a meaningful, and I think we'll have to have another session on this, but a meaningful impact on changing the way the world works and doing meaningful work and hopefully to some extent getting paid for it. And I feel like I've been able to show that too. post political career. But in politics, you have to not be afraid to lose. You have to not be afraid to gore those oxes that we would take on. I mean, one example of what I did is we realized that the way that the public utilities commissioners in Ohio were nominated was not done in public meetings, which was a requirement of the law. And I prepared quo warranto actions removing all of the Public Utilities Commission members that had been, so nominated because they didn't have a legal right to the office. The AG is one of the independent powers of an attorney general. The governor, instead of seizing the moment here to appoint people who were the Democratic governor, Ted Strickland, appoint people who were consumer oriented, because all three of those hacks came from the industry. They were all industry hacks with a long relationship with the public utilities in the state and very little care or concern for the people of the state of Ohio or the environment of the state. So I was like, this is great. I'm gonna get rid of these folks, and then the governor will appoint three people who give a shit about everybody except the utilities to regulate them. Well, amazingly, he appointed the same three people back to the Public Utilities Commission. So, and he, and that was him. I mean, that was who he was, and that's there's certainly a place in the world for people that want to play by the rules and be beholden to folks. I mean, the Democrats took over the governor in the state of the state announced, and this was an AG accomplishment. One of the first national organized AG accomplishments was the tobacco settlement, where tobacco companies were paid billions and billions of dollars to support the health care in states of people who they had harmed. He announced that he was going to securitize all of the proceeds of the tobacco settlement. As I barely could control myself from getting up and punching him during the State of the Union or State of the State address when he did it. When I had to sit there like a polite gentleman that I of course am, and used it to fund a $200 property tax cut that nobody remembers, but enriched the investment bankers who supported his candidacy for governor dramatically, billions and billions of dollars of Ohio bonds backed by the proceeds of that. I mean, it's so there's example after example and again, that's just in my little universe of what I was able to do.
Okay, we've got literally 13 minutes until and we can carry this on. Boy, I didn't.
Sorry.
I didn't even know we were going to. I mean, there's so much more that I really want to get to, and I hope I can invite you for further dialogues one-on-one, and we'll pick up where we left off. But I'm going to ask you a series of questions and just try to encapsulate them because of just short, and you got to get on to other meetings. But I want to start with this. Okay, the nature of everything that's happening with the election of Donald Trump. You already had suggested kind of the parallel between him and Traficant. He's an expression of the machine, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've formulated forever, which you identified at the beginning, corruption is the tumor that impacts everything. The nature of corruption, though, we have remedies for that. And they typically start with the most comprehensive, which is racketeering influenced corrupt organization, which you were able to implement in really the case that brought us to you, but using that as kind of a marker, and you were the only one in the country that did it. Your former governor Kasich was connected. He was at Lehman Brothers beforehand. Obviously,
right.
Was such a huge part of this, but you just basically, in a nutshell, showed the political constraints of how this thing works. And by the way, you represent pensioners, and the pensioners were targets of that particular, monumental destruction. But this is all what's created, MAGA, and you're right in the middle of it. So here's the series of questions. What, in the causality or the priority of the problems right now, especially as it faces the Democratic Party, how do you not prioritize, where do you put the notion of corruption in the context of reforming everything?
Well, I think we have to first recognize that we as Democrats have been active participants in the corruption that brought Trump to office, and second, realize that Trump has taken corruption to a PhD level, of organization and having no fucks left to give. Absolutely is as shameless and devoted to corrupting the system for the benefit of he and his friends and the people. And he's a very insecure fella. The people whose approval he seeks, like Elon Musk and the other oligarchs, who were his. That's his model as people that are rich. Rich is success to him. It is everything. If to be an amateur psychiatrist, and so we need to become the party of law and order, and to rein all this stuff in, and to acknowledge that we didn't do our job, that we were too quick to bend to the will of the even in the Dodd-Frank bill that was passed after the financial crisis. Barney Frank and Chris Dodd were that bill started so much stronger than it ended up. It was amended and manipulated and fought, but it was one moment in the history of the Democratic Party of modern times where they really did hold the line, on establishing things that truly angered and embarrassed corporate lobbyists in DC. But it was such a rare example of that. But we got to get back to that.
Okay, let
We
me
got
ask
to
you,
get
okay,
Yeah,
let me answer.
yeah,
Okay, thank you for because now we got 9 minutes. So the long
yeah.
and the short of it is, look, by the way, there was a loophole that I discovered just recently within
Yeah.
Dodd-Frank that enabled the Secretary of the Treasury to basically outmaneuver really the 1,200 pages of legalese that would prevent everything that took place during the Great Financial Crisis. Because during Trump one, they backdoored another 22 trillion in repo loans that nobody even understands what happened because of a bank run or a repo run with SoftBank in Japan, who was connected to Trump right now with crypto, which is interesting. But then you enabled what I continue to zero in on, the illegal usage of the Federal Reserve to basically go around Congress to provide trillions of dollars in liquidity to this financial system that continues to do what it does and by politicians on both sides of the aisle. So here's Marc Dann, a guy who's spent a career in politics, who's laid it all on the line, who's been the Attorney General of the state of Ohio, who implemented a RICO conviction of a relatively mid-level player that was basically, an example of the entire financial system that was involved with literally an $800 trillion global calamity. Okay. So Marc Dann has done something that nobody in the country has done. So he's a person that has the credibility, the integrity, and the character and the experience to have done what nobody in this country has done. That's what the people need to understand that are watching this. Marc Dann has done what no one has done. Not Elizabeth Warren, not Bernie Sanders, not AOC, not the front runners in this, so-called populist movement. Marc, let's just say millions of people in the next 7 minutes suddenly discover that Marc Dann, who just had the temerity to say, yeah, or whatever party replaces the Democratic Party, because the inference is that the Democrats have been so corrupt along the lines to enable the escape hatch of Wall Street to continue to control this country, very much like organized crime. Sorry, that's all loaded in a very short period of time. But you've got the opportunity to lead us forward. If you had the opportunity to lead us forward, what would that look like?
Well, I mean, I think mobilizing, helping people understand what's going on. I mean, I think that's really important, to have leaders that are, again, unafraid to speak truth to power, whether it be political power or economic power. And we've been sorely lacking for those leaders. I mean, Chuck Schumer's decision on the budget bill, just a couple of weeks ago, was a prime example of that. At the end of the day, his Wall Street patrons just wouldn't let him pull the trigger. He knew what the right thing was to do, and the best thing to call them on their bullshit, is that. But they didn't. But to stand up, to continue to engage in fights, legally, to take on these powerful special interests, whether it's in civil lawsuits, whether it's taking on the government in seeking injunctions or seeking performance and adherence to the Constitution. Certainly, that's something to do. Helping to find and encourage new candidates that are willing to put themselves out there to do it. I have a friend who was in town. He's a documentary filmmaker like you, and because the Cleveland Film Festival's this week, and what he's working on now is a doc about people who stood up to power and whose lives then they ended up with death threats. One of the people he mentioned was that minister that during Trump's inauguration. Do you know that she had to move out of her house a couple of days after she gave that sermon,
I did not know that.
um, and had to have full-time security.
Wow.
People like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, who I agree with about nothing, but who again also chose to speak truth to power, and because of the nature of the information flow, the co-option of the information infrastructure by these same oligarchs who will continue to allow it to be bent to their political goals, mobilizing people to do things that they would never think of doing in their life. I have some unique sympathy for the January 6th folks who were manipulated by very smart people, foreign and domestic, I believe, but to commit acts that they would never ever have done in their lives. And it speaks to two things. It speaks to their level of frustration and disappointment with how elected officials have served them in the past, and two, and to the anger that they feel, but also to their vulnerability to being manipulated by charlatans like Trump, and by the cynical corporate folks that are using Trump as a vehicle to get done what they've been trying to get done since the 1960s, through the Powell memo, to downsize federal government so it won't get in the way of business. They've been manipulated by those folks. None of those folks will suffer when that happens. If the air is not pure, they'll find a place to live. They'll be okay. But the folks that they've manipulated will not be. If you can't open a product and not be at risk of it burning, and exploding in your baby's hands, because there's no consumer product safety regulation anymore. The oligarchs will be fine. The corporate leaders, the CEOs will be fine. The public corporations, the big shareholders will, because they can move on. So that's, I think we need to make sure that we find an honest way to use these new tools of communication to lead people to the right direction. That government without corruption will ultimately be the only course that will allow them to be protected in their lives going forward.
Well, I hope that we can continue some of these one-on-one dialogues, because I honestly I didn't anticipate that. I've got thousands of questions now, but in the sort of conclusion of this dialogue, I just want to say that again, in the description link, I'll put below some of the items that you can explore more about Marc Dann and his law firm and the people that they represent and that sort of thing. But in addition to that, I hope we can come back and talk further, because again, I would like to put some corners on, potentially give people some hope and clarity about what we have to do to drive forward to be a buttress against this, which you've already established, but we need to get some more clarity on that. So thank you so much for your time. I'll let you go, and I'll say have a great day, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Patrick.
All right. All the best. Until next time.
Thanks.